my name is Tryphena, and welcome to thaigl Takeaway with Tryphena, me. This episode is going to be a little bit heavy because we're going to talk about something that is a little bit of an opinion piece, and therefore I want to approach this as delicately as possible because this episode is going to discuss the necessity of graphic depictions in storytelling in the perspective of thaigl, of course. So, trigger warning. This discussion will include topics related to suicide, war, consent, and sexual assault as portrayed in the media, including Thai media. These subjects can be sensitive and may be difficult for some listeners, so viewer and listener discretion is advised. For everything shared in this episode reflects personal opinions and interpretations at this moment in time. The goal of this conversation is to explore and reflect on these portrayals in media, not to present definitive answers or conclusions. As with any discussion or analysis, perspectives can evolve. So if any opinions or understanding change in the future, I will come on and revisit and discuss the topics in future episodes. So, let's begin. What prompted me to make this episode podcast is because of my only sunshine. The release of episode 3 creates such an uproar online that it started a discussion on how sexual assault is being depicted in media in general, and also is it necessary to show these things in thaigl. And episode 4, which is the follow-up episode of episode 3, is basically a discussion on what we consider as acceptable and what we consider as, you know what, is this the way to handle it? That's a conversation that's currently ongoing. So, to give you an idea what has happened in episode 3, at the end of that episode, Flynn, one of the main characters, seemingly kind of takes advantage and forces herself upon Sun, who is another main character. And of course, her reason is that I am so upset with you because you lied to me about never being with someone else before. The thing we don't know is that there was a twin theory, right, in episode 4 that was revealed. And of course, in episode 3, genuinely, I personally do not believe that there's anything that could justify her forcing herself onto Sun, because that's just unacceptable, regardless of the situation. Because two wrongs doesn't make a right, basically. But I digress. Episode 4 is, like I said, the follow-up. Episode 4, I deemed okay. I guess I'll take it. Because episode 4 felt like it is sweeping under the rug, but they also took the liberty of smoothing the rug out, which I appreciate, because it is much better than to sweep it under the rug, have it never addressed, and then yet we can still see that lump under the rug. At least here in episode 4, they kind of flatten it down so that we're like, I guess it's acceptable, right? But again, a lot of people were not really happy about it. The uproar is not so bad, but it's just that people were not as happy still, because basically episode 4 shows that actions like these can be rewarded with a happy ending. Another show from like 2024 is one of the OG shows. It is quite loved, right? But that show was in the dangerous zone for me because it had the opening scene be a scene where, again, boundaries were not respected. And that show is called Affair, the series. So Affair starts the whole entire series immediately with one who is one of the main characters kind of forcing herself again onto Plang, who is another main character. But of course, this one, it's only just kissing. It is not as bad as like My Only Sunshine with actual rape, right? When actually like touching her and like making her her own. This one is just kissing, but you can visibly see that Plang is trying to push her away, saying no a few times, pushing her away, and it was not respected. So again, this one, why is it so not so bad, right? Because it was only kissing. There are tears to this, unfortunately. Even though boundaries were not respected, but the tear, it was not the worst. So it was easily ignored. I don't remember specifically why the scene was necessary, but it's more like the whole story had some plot holes. This was also the only story that I read. I only read Affair's novel, and I didn't read any other thaigl books because I really genuinely wanted to understand the story of Affair, and I loved the book. So I have determined that they didn't have enough time to tell everything in Affair. And I think everybody, of if not a lot of people, understood this, and it was kind of excused. The first scene determines the first impression of that show, and they came on strong with this depiction, and it split the audience kind of in two different groups of people. The first group is where they are so into it, they're all for it, oh my god, this is so exciting, right? That group. And then there's me, right? The people that just like, at least buy me dinner first, right? At least let me know, give me some context before we do this. I am not unaccepting of this, I just needed a bit more context. So because of that, it split the audience into half. I felt like if there's a little bit more of a backstory first and then we get this scene, I think it would have been a lot better. But again, it is what we got, a Fair the series. And like I said, it is well loved for a reason. The actresses are amazing. But the story, I still believe that it did not receive the amount of time that it deserved. That's why we're missing a lot of context of the characters, and that's why like sometimes there is a consensus when stories are told properly. When there is not a consensus and it's quite split, either the story is controversial or there's just not enough context for the characters to be properly understood. And I will digress even further. So Lomi and Sonia, who are the stars in the Fair the series, they have another show that also got a little bit of heat, but it was not so bad because this part was understood. They have a show called Harmony Secret, and in the first episode, they again have another scene that is in the gray area where I think one of the characters, the main characters played by one of them, they kissed the other one. Again, this was an unprompted kiss. Again, gray area, but understood because this was more of a power play. So basically, these two play the daughters of rival companies, and it got just really exciting. And like I said, that kiss was kind of a power play. Like, I could invade your space, like that kind of thing. But again, I think there was enough context that they were rivals in that sense, and it just turned a little bit sexual, right? I think with that context, people are able to like, you know what, I guess, you know, and they excuse it. Unlike My Only Sunshine, context was not given. The context did not allow us to like the characters enough to excuse it, basically. So why is that My Only Sunshine didn't really get the kind of like excuse? Is because thaigl has a format, and thaigl usually is a fantasy-like storyline with a happy ending. So when you allow something to break that mold, which is what My Only Sunshine is doing, people are not comfortable with it. But at the same time, being uncomfortable means that there is growth. But is this growth something that's in the right direction? We don't know yet, because My Only Sunshine is the only thaigl show that has a scene like this, which is a depiction of what it seems to be sexual assault. However, thaigl stories usually have inconsistencies and plot holes and a lot of different interpretations of the actual novel itself, because number one, they have a budget constraint. That's the main thing. Budget constraints limits the amount of episodes they can make. That means in the novel adaptation, they have to pick and choose important things to put in the story to tell a story in like a limited amount of episodes. And again, that's why Affair had a lot of leeway, because like I said, they did not get enough episodes to tell the full context of the story. Because I read the book, it was good, I liked it. And then with My Only Sunshine, it is only halfway in. I think the director's direction was a little bit inconsistent, because in the first 3 episodes, Flint's character, the one that does the taking advantage of, right? Flint's character came off as cold. She did not really care for Sun. She knows nothing about Sun, or rather she does not care about Sun all these years. And suddenly, after they meet for the first time after a few years, suddenly she's in every aspect of her life. There was no easing in. They did not allow us to understand Flint. So when she did this, it was so jarring for us to, as an audience, to see why she's doing this to a girl that she claims to love. It does not make sense. It is essentially just rape. right? Again, understanding the budget constraints, inconsistencies, and plot holes and all that. I guess I understood that there's the inconsistency like what I mentioned before with Flint, and I wanted to give it a chance because yes, this is really out of nowhere. There was no trigger warning, but how did they handle the aftermath of it? That's why I waited. I was patient. I waited for another week. I was just in shock that they did this because I had no heads up, right? I knew there was a heads up, but I didn't realize that they would also show Sun crying and not enjoying it and basically giving in because Flint didn't trust her, right? The whole focus was the fact that Flint did not trust her because Flint thought that she saw Sun in the club when actually she saw the twin, right? It was like a whole thing. We are still exploring that. I think in episode 5 they will slowly explore that a little bit more. It's just that, like I said, there was no trigger warning and there was no like, hey, this is gonna happen. I would much prefer if they had that so I can prepare myself, right? So when episode 4 came about, to sum it up, it explained away Flint's behavior and her intentions by saying that, oh, I've always loved you, Sun. I've loved you this whole time. Here's a name tag that belonged to you that I took and I didn't tell you, and I have it on me this entire time because why would I not put it in the pocket or somewhere else? Or why would I not put it in a drawer? Let me just bring this along with me this entire time so that I can randomly present it to you. But like logic aside, right? But she got angry and took advantage of the situation and like forced herself onto Sun because she has loved her this whole time, to which Sun accepts, and then that's what concluded the storyline. Many were not happy about it. They're still not happy about how it's handled because this rewards bad behavior. This rewards the mentality that, I should just do what I want and apologize later and I'll still get a good happy ending. But I will present you a theory. Okay, trauma, while it is trauma, it does not appear the same to everybody. For example, a car accident. Put two people in the same car accident, one might just stay home for the next 3 to 6 months. The other might just jump right into a car and like carry on their day. It does not affect them the same way because they're two different people that processes like trauma differently, right? So the so-called incident that we deem as, oh my god, this must be so traumatic for her, did not seem like trauma, even though she was a virgin, right? Because her only focus that we've realized in episode 4 was that Flint did not believe her. And Flint was upset with her because she didn't think that Sun was being honest. That was always the focus. That's why in the end, when Flint finally confesses her feelings to Sun, Sun was like, oh my god, it's finally reciprocated. Yes, I'll do you again. So while again we disliked it, I get it. I will like accept it, I guess. You know what I mean? Because because Sun was exactly where she wanted to be. So in layman terms, it is basically watching your friend get into a relationship with someone that is toxic and with someone that everybody is screaming for them to stay away from. And of course, one day they did something wrong and then they come back and be like, I'm so sorry. They give a terrible apology and Sun's like, oh my god, damn, I love you again. So Sun is exactly where she wants to be and we have to let her. Basically, that's the entire dynamic of Flint and Sun, okay? Again, this is not a good message because there's gonna be a small part of the audience that thinks that this is completely okay to do. You're okay to do all these things as long as you apologize later on and you will not suffer any consequences. So this makes me really conflicted about the show. I'm watching it for research purposes, okay? I wouldn't recommend it to anybody who wants a good show. The keyword is a good show. But of course, I am a content creator for thaigl. I would not have offered up my time, my eyes, and my comprehension for a show like this as a sacrifice, okay? I would have used that time for something else much more productive. But yet, because I'm a content creator for thaigl, I am here doing this. Thank you for being here. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram, X, and Twitch. I'm mostly on TikTok because that was my main platform I started out with. So TikTok, Instagram, and X, it is Tryphena93. On Twitch, it is Tryphena933. Feel free to leave a comment. This is a discussion, basically. I'm open to listening to other people's point of view. Do you agree or disagree that there's a necessity for graphic depictions? So back to the video. But let's look at the facts. My Only Sunshine is possibly a gateway show for potentially heavier topics in thaigl shows, which can be very important to have the conversation about, because storytelling is supposed to be a lesson, it's supposed to be a cautionary tale, or it's supposed to be an escape at this point. And I think there are different stories that should be told in due time, because again, thaigl is relatively young, and GL stories are what? They are stories of two women who fall in love. And when there is a relationship, there are going to be dynamics that are just not very nice to discuss in public or to even put on screen. But these are necessary because it can act as, again, a cautionary tale or a lesson. Like, for example, domestic abuse can happen in the same gendered household, financial fraud, narcissistic partners, and a lot of other very heavy topics that when the community is ready to talk about, I'm pretty sure short films even for this is going to be important enough for people to share their stories, for people to tell stories like this, because stories like this can give the right audience strength, courage, hope to leave their situation, or even in other aspects of their life, even if, right, they are not in the same situation alone. That's why, again, the topic is about the necessity of graphic depictions in storytelling. And I would still say that off the top of my head, again, story has three things, right? Lessons, cautionary tale, or escape. And I feel that graphic depictions are one of the best ways to tell people, hey, this is important, this is heavy, or this is perhaps like fun, right? Fun things are so nice to see, but heavy things are also meant to teach you something. So my issue with stories like this is basically the fact that My Only Sunshine can continue on with this storyline without that scene, right? It served no purpose than if Flint came in, threw something at her, and it hit her in the face. It's the same thing, right? That was an accident, she lost her temper. That is, in my opinion, much easier to explain away. The issue that I have with My Only Sunshine, or just stories in general like this, is that the same point could be made without scenes like this, right? All we wanted to show is that Flint was angry at Sun for lying. It didn't need to go into something that was sexual in nature. She could have thrown something and it almost hit Sun. Same thing, she's angry, she lost her temper. She could have thrown something and it hit her in accident as a mistake, right? That could also show anger, show the loss of temper. It could have gotten the message across. But again, we don't know what they did it, but that is what they did, and this is how they handled it, right? I'm not happy about it again, but it was not necessary, in my opinion. It was completely unnecessary because the point was to say that she was angry, and that didn't need a scene like this. Because graphic scenes should be only there if it pushes the story narrative. If you put it there and it has no purpose to the main storyline, it is only there for shock value. Because I am someone that likes to think, and I would like to challenge my own comfort zone, right? Because whenever I watch something that makes me so uncomfortable that it makes me squirm because I'm not used to it, I will always ask myself if this adds to the storyline, if this adds to the heaviness or the seriousness of whatever that's happening. Does it make me feel for the victim in this series? And does it make me feel for the story or for the intended audience, right? Because if it does, great. Because the truth is sometimes really ugly. Even half-truths are really, really ugly. And sometimes, for someone like me, I wouldn't say that I'm super exposed to a lot of the things that's happening in the world. And sometimes to experience that or to understand it even, it is purely through films and storytelling, right? Because we can only live one life, and sometimes our lives are just a little bit too sheltered, we're too ignorant, and the only way to expand the horizons is to be exposed to films and stories and listen to other people tell their lives and documentaries. That's why graphic depictions sometimes is needed. Let's start with something that's a little bit more realistic, like for example, Criminal Minds. All the episodes, really heavy, really, really focused on the fact that we're trying to catch the bad guy and that is not okay. All the episodes of all these CSI shows, Law and Order SVU, these are supposedly stories that has a lesson or has like a specific thing to teach strength, to teach resilience in the victims. And I think these, while sometimes is a bit out there, but it is sometimes inspired by real life events. So it is quite crazy to see that, you know, sometimes the worst day of people's lives are actually a real life thing. And we go on to fiction, Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has a scene with Khaleesi and Drogo, right? And it was a scene where Drogo forced himself onto Khaleesi. But that part, I didn't watch Game of Thrones, but that part was something that I saw because it was viral, right? Because again, this was one of the first times, or rather, a very, very obvious scene with this kind of graphic nature situation, right? So to me, in that point, when I saw that scene, is to show how powerful Drogo is and the power imbalance between him and Khaleesi. And for Khaleesi, it was to show helplessness in the situation. I don't know what happened in the future, but in that scene specifically, I get it. And it was not very prolonged, specifically in that scene, right? I don't know about the other scenes, right? But just this scene on its own. For Orange is the New Black, there's this inmate called Pensataki. She is a tragic story on its own. But specifically, I want to focus on the fact that she was taken advantage of by one of the guards in the story. And it was necessary to show a story like this because it is also the reality of some of the US inmates. Another one is in Glee, where a guy called Karofsky, he was bullied for being gay, right? He was bullied for liking men. And then there were scenes leading up to it showing him getting prepared for his own like suicide. They didn't show the hanging. They didn't really show him doing it, but they showed the father finding him. Again, these can be very, very sensitive, right? Because if you take another show with similar themes like this, which is 13 Reasons Why, that scene, the bathtub scene, had like a whole uproar on its own because people were worried that it's gonna create copycats, right? They were scared that it was gonna glorify suicide, and it was taken down. But the thing is that I've seen that part where the mom finds her and the denial that the actress went through during the scene. It is incredibly heartbreaking and it stays with you because, again, it is to teach people to not kill themselves, right? But this was necessary. All these things are necessary to tell the story. But again, we also have to be aware who is watching it because we don't want to expose this to people who are mentally a little bit younger, who are not supposed to be seeing these at a certain age. I think I am fully on the I'm fully on the side of parents who don't want these things exposed to their kids before they are ready, because I am also a true believer of you are what you consume. So I don't want to be desensitized to violence and blood and gore, all these things at such a young age. I feel like there are certain innocence that should be protected if it's to teenagers and even kids, because it doesn't make them mature when they're not old enough to process it. So when uh when 13 Reasons Why took out certain scenes or they addressed certain scenes, I fully agree because that story was aimed towards teenagers, aimed towards kids in high school, because the kids in the story were in high school. And I didn't watch it. I know certain scenes because it was so controversial that I come across it. But I didn't like that book specifically because that book really blamed the suicide of the main character on everyone else but herself. She made the decision. It was like a whole thing, right? But basically, the 13 Reasons Why felt like 13 reasons of blaming why she took her own life, which is not the best, honestly. But that show gained so much popularity. But also at the same time, I don't think it gave the actresses the kind of fame that they want, because I think it was such a taboo project. It was such a taboo thing that made people so uncomfortable, but it did start a lot of conversations. So there's that fine line that you have to balance when you tell a story as controversial or as heavy as this. And of course, talking about controversial, you get war films, right? I watched Schindler's List, and that kind of stayed with me a little bit. It made me aware of how cruel the Nazis were. Because, like I said, when you read books, words can only explain so much. And one scene that stayed with me when one of the, I think, the heads of the Nazis in the concentration camps, Jeff, Joth, I don't know what his name is played by Ralph Fiennes, who played Voldemort. That character that he played was evil. He would shoot prisoners for fun from his balcony. And that truly showcased how ruthless these Nazis were. And again, it's so graphic because you see him shooting and then they just explode and like, you know, it's just so incredibly graphic. But that was war. That was World War II. And was it necessary? I wouldn't watch it at 15. I don't think I could understand it. So I think halfway watching it at the age, I was like, no, thank you, right? When I wait till I was older, in my 20s, I watched it again, and it just made me so devastated for the Jews at the time. And again, it achieved the purpose of telling a story that needed to be told, right? But of course, how far is too far? Because again, I have examples of very, very graphic but not needed shows. Number one, all the seasons of American Horror Story. That show was done as satire and also for shock value for ratings because none of those were actually needed. Season 1 was fine. Certain like 1 to 3 was okay. 4 was it was just so controversial. 4 onwards it became a little bit more graphic. It felt like they were trying to push boundaries, right? But the 5th episode where it was talking about the freaks, those were grotesque. Okay, it made me so uncomfortable that I had to reevaluate where my boundaries were, and I had to really ask myself, do I need to be consuming this? Because it made me feel icky. It was so, like I said, uncomfortable, and not in a way that makes me think, you know? It made me just want to skip a lot of the parts of it, because really it is to just show things that make you squirm. That was the point, and I think that was the point of American Horror Story. So it had really good ratings because people like a show. People like to be entertained. They like horror movies, slasher movies for a reason. But it was controversial, right? That is satire. Let's talk about another show, Dharma, from Netflix. It is to show the life and all the crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer, I think back in the 60s in the US. The case alone, when you read it, is so morbid, it is so graphic. Was it necessary to show it? I watched it as morbid fascination because how can someone do something so terrible? But of course, it begs the conversation, are half of these needed? I don't think they are on the level of American Horror Story in terms of certain things. But I do believe that there's a whole other conversation that needs to be had when they do documentaries on serial killers, because I've seen articles and I've seen on social media the protests of the victims' families, which I completely understand. But again, like I said, there's a fine line between telling all these stories and having it be an educational thing, and for it to be just entertainment. Because I think as a society, the moment we lose that empathy is where we kind of lose the point of civilization. You know what I mean? Because the first evidence of civilization is when you can find a broken femur bone, right? I'm paraphrasing from what I saw. But the first sign of civilization is when you find a femur bone that is healed. Why? Because the femur bone is one of the strongest bones in the body. If it heals, it takes 6 to 8 months, right? And that means there's empathy. With empathy, there's someone protecting this person, saying like, hey, you are unwell, you are sick, let me sit here and take care of you while you heal. That is empathy, and that is civilization. Without empathy, there's no civilization. But thank God, like I said, all these shows I've listed out, there's always trigger warnings, especially when it comes to certain themes. Like what I did in the beginning, I said there will be themes of A, B, C, D, E. I've told you straight out that we are going to be talking about this. It's a conversation to be had. We're going to dig a little bit, right? So These trigger warnings are so important for people to decide if they want to be embarking on this journey with you or not. Like if I watch all these other shows, there was one point, even in Criminal Minds, even though it is not real, I had to take a break. It was so heavy, it was so serious that you know what, I had to take a break, and I felt like, you know what, I need to take a breather, man. Life is not so dire where every single phone call means a ransom, you know what I mean? So when audiences are allowed to choose, you increase the credibility of the company and of the series. And of course, I don't mean the cute little all characters and events in this series are fictional and created solely for the entertainment purposes. No, that is not a good enough warning. That's a disclaimer, right? A trigger warning specifically says these are all the things I'll be talking about. Viewer discretion is advised because I'm talking about these heavy things. There's a fine line between, oh my god, that's what my dad said to me. He said I was useless. And then now it's going to be depicted in the show. There's that, and there's, oh my god, I was sexually assaulted before. And my story, coincidentally, is the same as the show's one. It's two different things. You need a trigger warning for situations, or at least the scene before the scene, right? At least put in something like trigger warning. This is going to be happening in 3, 2, pop. Even if there's no such thing like that, right? You still need to warn people that there's gonna be this scene that's happening, so that people have a choice. You cannot give them whiplash, especially in this era where there's so much happening in the world, where people watch thaigl as an escape. Thaigl is an escape for a lot of people. Therefore, we have the characteristic of thaigl, which is fantasy-like stories, or sometimes stories that don't make sense, with a happy ending, right? If you're gonna break that mold, make sure you have every single precaution written down, every safety in place, so that if anything happens, people cannot point a finger at you and say that you didn't tell them, okay? The same way, if I make this topic about something so deep and dark, right? I have to tell people, we're gonna discuss about this. Do you want to be in this? We're not saying that My Only Sunshine is wrong for showing these things. There's a few things that could have done better, right? Number one, trigger warnings. Really, I did not want that whiplash. That turn was so fast. I couldn't even pause, man. It just took a turn. And number two, if it's not needed, it doesn't have to be in it. That's still my opinion. I guess you handled it, but it was not needed. Okay, that's number two. And number three, it is one thing to be surprised by a proposal, for your parents to yell at you in a story, or even for someone getting slapped, right? It's one thing for it to be that. It's another thing for things to suddenly take a turn, and it suddenly becomes like a really terrible flashback for some people watching it. So that's why, like, there's a fine line to these things. You have to make sure that you handle this as delicately as possible, because while these are so graphic in nature, it's so necessary to a storyline because it tells the story and it gives it validity and it gives it credibility, right? Because I feel like I cannot understand a lot of things that I have never been through. That's only human. Like, for example, with the war documentaries, right? I don't understand what it means like to be in war. Only my grandparents will understand it. But if they're gone now, right? Who am I gonna ask? Of course, you have to turn to the documentaries, you have to turn to history books, you have to turn to museums. And why is it in museums? Sometimes they will tell you this section of the museum will have disturbing images and all these things. Because one way to show the cruelty of war and to show the damage of war is to actually show what has been done during war, what has been done to the people, what devastation that these people have experienced. It's only fair to tell stories exactly like it is, because it's an important story. The same thing with telling stories like this, right? You're trying to give out a reality that allows people to relate, or it allows people to feel seen, because victims need a voice too. But you have to do it delicately. That does not disrespect the actual point of the storyline. Because anytime you do this without a reason, without a purpose, it becomes a spectacle, it becomes entertainment, it completely diminishes whatever story you're trying to tell the audience, right? If the victim is supposed to be in pain, she's supposed to go through stuff and all these things, which was what I was looking for in episode 4 of My Only Sunshine. Because for someone that's been through certain things, there are signs of people scrubbing on their skin because they want to get the smell off, or they change their clothes. Does she have any behaviors like that that feels like she went through sexual assault, right? It doesn't feel like it. She's just upset, right? So I don't think it was necessary at all to have that scene, since it has no effect on Sun. Right now, the only thing that we can do is to just explain it away, right? Trauma is not the same for everyone. But at the same time, it would be the same thing if Flynn threw something at her face and it hit her, and then she's mad at her the whole day. It's the same story. That's why it feels like it's for the shock value, it's for entertainment. It does knock down some points for me. But again, I am fair because I'm Tryphena. They get points, even though I did put them on blast for the entire podcast episode. They do get some points for having a follow-up and addressing it, because poor follow-up is better than no follow-up, okay? I will back off just a little bit because of this. Like I said, I'm not happy with how the storyline is being handled, but I guess if this is their best, I will accept it reluctantly. This episode is a little bit heavy, a little bit like long on this, because there is always a conversation to be had, especially if they keep coming into my TikTok lives asking me about it. So that's why I made a video. The philosophy of content creation is that if they ask you twice, make a video. And this is basically a discussion, so feel free to leave a comment on what the next episode should be, or if you want to continue on the conversation, feel free to leave it in the comments down below too. If you're on Spotify, leave me 5 stars for the podcast and tell me what else do you want me to talk about. And if you are on YouTube, feel free to subscribe to me. I make more contents, there will be reaction videos, a lot of things basically in play. So do tell me what you want next, and I will make it happen. Thank you for joining me this episode. So I am on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I am also on X. Now I'm on Spotify and YouTube. These are all my accounts. Except from Twitch, everything else is Tryphena93. For Twitch, it's Tryphena933. Because I got hacked last time, and then I just could not recover the account. So it is Tryphena933. I talk about other thaigl content, I do reaction videos, I'm still building the account, so do give me some time. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!